The words, "I'm taking you and your children home tonight," froze Clara's blood as she stared at the towering, armed cowboy filling her cabin doorway. With 3 fresh graves behind the homestead and nothing but crumbs in the cupboards, she couldn't decide if this silent stranger was her family's salvation or their executioner. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The prairie wind carried dust and desperation across the withered fields of the Henderson homestead. Clara Henderson stood at the grave of her husband, her thin frame buffeted by the relentless gusts that seemed determined to drive her and her children from the land they had fought so hard to claim. 3 small crosses now marked the family plot. Her husband Thomas, taken by fever just 2 weeks past, and her brothers who had succumbed to the same illness days before. Only Clara and her 3 children remained, a widow with babes against the merciless frontier. "Mama, I'm hungry," whispered Emma, her eldest at 5 years, tugging at Clara's threadbare skirt. Sarah, just 3, stood silently beside her sister, thumb in mouth, eyes large and solemn in her dirt-smudged face. The baby, James, slept against Clara's shoulder, unaware of the precarious thread by which their future hung. "I know, sweetheart. We'll eat soon." The lie tasted bitter. Their stores had dwindled to almost nothing, a handful of cornmeal, a few dried apples, perhaps enough for 1 more day. The well was running dry, the crops had withered in the drought, and the nearest town was 2 days' ride away. Clara had prayed for rain, for mercy, for some sign of what to do next. The answer had been only silence and wind. She looked toward the horizon, where the sun hung low, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red. Like fire, she thought, like the world burning away. "Come," she said, taking Emma's small hand. "Let's get inside before dark." Their cabin, once a source of such pride for Thomas, now seemed to mock her with its solidity. The walls her husband had raised would stand long after they were gone. Already the darkness was creeping in, filling the corners with shadows that made the small space feel like a tomb. Clara lit their last candle, its feeble light doing little to push back the encroaching night. She fed the children the last of the cornmeal mush, watching as they scraped their wooden bowls clean with desperate fingers. Her own stomach cramped with hunger, but she had learned to ignore it. Mothers went hungry, so children could eat. That was the way of things. When the children were tucked into the single bed they shared, Clara sat at the rough-hewn table, head in her hands. Tomorrow, she would have to make a decision. Stay and face starvation, or pack what little they had and start walking toward town, risking the journey with 3 small children and no protection. The sound came so suddenly that at first she thought she had imagined it, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. Clara's heart leaped to her throat. Visitors were rare in this isolated stretch of territory, and not all who traveled these parts had honorable intentions. She grabbed Thomas's old rifle from above the door, checking that it was loaded. It had been years since she'd fired a gun, but her father had taught her well before she'd left home to marry. The weight of it was reassuring in her hands as she moved to the window, peering out into the gathering dusk. A lone rider approached, his broad-shouldered silhouette backlit by the dying sun. He rode unhurried, confident, a man who knew his place in the world. As he drew closer, Clara could make out more details: the worn leather of his chaps, the weathered hat pulled low over his brow, the holster at his hip that undoubtedly held a revolver. Her finger tensed on the trigger. "That's far enough," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "State your business." The rider reined his horse to a stop, raising one hand slowly to show he meant no harm. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied the cabin, his gaze lingering on the thin tendril of smoke from the chimney, the 3 small crosses visible on the hill behind. "Ma'am," he finally said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the gathering darkness. Name's Ethan Wade. I've been hired to bring you and your children to Fort Collins. Clara's grip on the rifle didn't waver. Hired by whom? Your father, ma'am. Samuel Montgomery. The name hit her like a physical blow. Clara hadn't spoken to her father in 7 years, not since she'd defied his wishes and married Thomas Henderson, a man her father had deemed beneath her station. Their parting words had been bitter, filled with pride and hurt on both sides. My father doesn't know where I am, she said, suspicion edging her voice. He's been looking for 3 years, ma'am. Hired trackers, sent telegrams to every settlement between here and Kentucky. Got word last month that you were homesteading in these parts, then news came about the fever spreading. He paused, shifting slightly in his saddle. He's worried for his daughter and grandchildren he's never met. Clara's mind raced. Could it be true? Had her proud father finally swallowed his pride enough to send for her? Or was this some elaborate deception? How do I know you're telling the truth? The man called Ethan Wade reached slowly into his saddlebag and pulled out an envelope, holding it up so she could see. Your father gave me this to give to you. Said you'd know it was from him. Clara hesitated, then lowered the rifle slightly. Toss it here. He complied, and the envelope landed in the dirt a few feet from the porch. Keeping the gun trained on him, Clara stepped forward and snatched it up. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, her father's precise, sloping script spelling out her name. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and something else, a small golden locket. Her breath caught in her throat. The locket had belonged to her mother, who had died when Clara was just 12. It was her father's most treasured possession, something he would never part with, unless... She unfolded the letter, struggling to read it in the fading light. Clara, I have been a proud, foolish old man. I pray this finds you and my grandchildren well. The bearer, Mr. Wade, is a man of exceptional character who has my complete trust. Please return with him to Fort Collins. Whatever differences lie between us can be mended. Your room is waiting, your loving father. Tears blurred her vision. She looked up at the silent rider, truly seeing him for the first time. Ethan Wade sat perfectly still, giving her time to process, to decide. There was nothing threatening in his posture, nothing that suggested deception, just patience and a quiet strength that radiated from him even in the growing darkness. When would we leave? Clara asked, the rifle now lowered completely. First light, he answered simply. We have a long journey ahead. A sudden cry from inside the cabin reminded Clara that her children were the ones whose futures hung in the balance. She had been prepared to do whatever necessary to ensure their survival, even if it meant swallowing her own pride and returning to her father. We have very little food, she admitted, the words costing her. Wade nodded, unsurprised. I've brought provisions. Enough to see us to Fort Collins. He dismounted then, his movements fluid despite his size. In the last light of day, Clara could see he was a formidable man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore his gun with the ease of a man accustomed to its weight, but there was nothing threatening in his manner as he approached, leading his horse. I'll make camp here, he said, gesturing to a spot a respectful distance from the cabin. We'll head out at dawn. Clara nodded, still clutching the locket in one hand and the letter in the other. Mr. Wade? He turned, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat. Thank you, she said softly, for coming all this way. Something flickered across his face, not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. Then he nodded once and turned away, leaving Clara standing in the doorway with the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in weeks. Inside the cabin, the children slept on, unaware that by this time tomorrow they would be miles away from the only home they had ever known, in the company of a stranger who had appeared like a shadow against the setting sun. offering salvation in her darkest hour. Dawn broke clear and cold, the first fingers of light reaching across the prairie to touch the small cabin where Clara had spent her last night as mistress of the Henderson homestead. She had slept little, torn between gratitude for the salvation that had appeared and grief at abandoning the dreams she and Thomas had built together. Every nail in the cabin walls, every furrow in the field outside, held memories of her husband's hands, his determination, his love. Outside, Ethan Wade had already saddled his horse and was securing packs of provisions. Clara watched him through the window as she dressed, his movements efficient, purposeful, a man who wasted neither time nor energy. He had built a small fire, and the smell of coffee drifted through the cracks in the cabin walls, rich and enticing. "Mama, who is that man?" Emma asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes as she climbed from the bed she shared with her siblings. "His name is Mr. Wade," Clara replied, lifting baby James and changing his diaper. "He's taking us to see your grandfather." "We have a grandfather?" Emma's eyes widened with wonder. The innocent question pierced Clara's heart. Her children had never known family beyond their parents and uncles. Thomas's parents had died before they were born, and her own father had been nothing but a story, a shadow figure from their mother's past. "Yes, sweetheart, a grandfather who lives in a big house in Fort Collins." "Will Papa be there?" Sarah asked, her small voice hopeful. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. "No, darling. Papa is in heaven now, remember? But he'd want us to be safe and cared for." She packed what little they could take, a change of clothes for each child, Thomas's Bible, her mother's silver hairbrush, the small wooden toys Thomas had carved during the long winter evenings. Everything else would remain, standing sentinel over a dream that had ended too soon. When Clara emerged from the cabin with her children, Ethan Wade straightened from his work, removing his hat briefly in greeting. In the clear morning light, she could see him more clearly, the strong line of his jaw, the deep-set eyes that seemed to hold secrets, the streaks of silver at his temples that belied his otherwise youthful appearance. "Morning, ma'am," he said, nodding to her and then to the children who clustered shyly behind their mother's skirts. "Got coffee made if you'd like some before we head out." "Thank you," Clara said, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and black, and it warmed her from the inside out. Ethan knelt down to eye level with Emma and Sarah, his imposing frame somehow less intimidating as he addressed the children directly. "Name's Ethan Wade. Seems I'll be escorting you ladies and your brother on a journey." His voice, though still deep, had softened, taking on a gentle tone Clara hadn't heard before. Emma, always the braver of the two girls, stepped forward. "Do you know our grandfather?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I do. He's a good man. Talks about you all the time, even though he's never met you." "How can he talk about us if he doesn't know us?" Emma persisted, her 5-year-old logic unassailable. "Well, he knows you're his grandchildren. That's enough to make you special to him," Ethan replied with surprising patience. "Now I need to know if you're brave enough for this journey. It's a long way to Fort Collins." Emma straightened her thin shoulders. "I'm very brave. Mama says so." "I don't doubt it," Ethan said with a solemn nod. "And what about you, little miss?" he asked, turning to Sarah. The 3-year-old buried her face in Clara's skirt, but peeked out with one eye, clearly intrigued despite her shyness. "Sarah's brave, too," Emma answered for her sister. "She just doesn't talk much to strangers." "That's smart," Ethan approved. "My horse's name is Thunder," he added, gesturing to the large bay gelding that stood patiently nearby. "Would you like to say hello to him?" Both girls nodded, their natural childish curiosity temporarily overcoming their wariness. Ethan led them to the horse, showing them how to offer their palms flat so Thunder could snuffle them safely. Clara watched, the baby balanced on her hip, surprised by this gentle side of the stoic cowboy. Most men she knew had little patience for children, viewing them as women's domain. Thomas had been an exception, delighting in his daughters and son, a memory that sent another pang of grief through her heart. "We should head out soon," Ethan said, returning to her side. "Want to cover as much ground as possible before midday?" Clara nodded, then turned for one last look at the cabin. "I need a moment," she said quietly. Understanding flickered in his eyes. "Take your time. I'll get the children settled." She walked slowly to the 3 crosses on the hill, baby James still in her arms. The morning sun warmed the simple wooden markers Thomas had made for her brothers, never imagining he would soon join them in the unyielding prairie soil. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears tracking down her cheeks. "I couldn't make it work without you, couldn't keep your dream alive." The wind caught her words, carrying them away across the endless grass. "I hope you understand." When she returned, Ethan had fashioned a kind of sling across his chest where baby James could ride securely, leaving Clara free to manage the girls. A second horse, a gentle-looking mare, stood beside Thunder. "For you and the girls," he explained. "Your father sent extra horses, but I left them with a friend about a day's ride from here. Didn't want to draw attention traveling with a string of horses." The practicality of his planning reassured Clara. This was a man who thought ahead, who considered dangers and prepared for them. Leaving proved harder than she had imagined. Each step away from the cabin felt like a betrayal, yet each step toward a future where her children wouldn't starve felt like salvation. The contradiction tore at her as they rode away from the only home her children had ever known. Ethan led them south, following what seemed to Clara to be an invisible trail across the vast expanse of prairie. He rode slightly ahead, his posture alert, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. They were vulnerable out here, a man, a woman, and 3 small children in a landscape as beautiful as it was dangerous. "How long to Fort Collins?" she asked when they stopped briefly to water the horses at a small creek. 5 days if the weather holds," Ethan replied, helping Emma down from the saddle. "There's a trading post where we can resupply in 3 days, a settlement where we can rest proper in 4. Clara nodded, trying to imagine 5 days in this man's company. He was still largely a mystery to her, taciturn yet surprisingly gentle with the children, clearly competent but offering little about himself or his background. "My father must trust you a great deal," she observed, watching as he refilled their water skins with practiced efficiency. Something unreadable flickered across his face. "Your father and I have an understanding," he said after a moment. "I owe him." "For what?" "That's between him and me, ma'am." His tone wasn't unkind, but it effectively closed the subject. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly. Sarah had begun to whimper, uncomfortable and unused to the long hours in the saddle. Even Emma's initial excitement had waned, replaced by the glazed expression of a tired child trying to be brave. "There's a stand of cottonwoods ahead," Ethan said, pointing to a distant smudge of green against the golden prairie. "We'll rest there through the worst of the heat." The small grove proved a welcome respite, the shade dropping the temperature by several degrees. Ethan helped Clara down from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she stepped away quickly, disconcerted by her body's reaction to this near stranger. If he noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign, turning immediately to help the girls. Baby James had slept remarkably well in the improvised sling, but woke hungry as Clara settled against a tree trunk to nurse him. "I'll scout the area," Ethan said, turning away to give her privacy. Clara watched him walk the perimeter of their small sanctuary, checking for signs of danger with the methodical thoroughness she was coming to associate with him. The children ate the jerky and hardtack he provided, too hungry to complain about the plain fare. "Do you have children, Mr. Wade?" Emma asked when he rejoined them, settling his long frame against a neighboring tree. The question seemed to catch him off guard. For the first time since his arrival, Clara saw genuine emotion cross his face, a flash of something like pain, quickly masked. "No," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "Always thought I might someday." "Why don't you?" Emma persisted with a child's directness. Ethan's gaze met Clara's briefly over the child's head. "Never found the right woman willing to put up with a man like me, I suppose." Something in his tone made Clara wonder what kind of man he believed himself to be, and what kind of woman he thought might tolerate him. Before she could ponder this further, he was on his feet again, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "Time to move out," he said, his voice suddenly taut with alertness. "Now?" "What is it?" Clara asked, clutching James closer. "Dust cloud, southwest, moving fast." He was already gathering their supplies, his movements quick but controlled. Could be nothing, could be trouble. Either way, we're not waiting to find out. They moved with urgent efficiency, Clara's heart hammering as she secured James in the sling Ethan had fashioned. The girls seemed to sense the tension, asking no questions as they were lifted onto the mare. Within minutes, they were moving again, Ethan setting a pace that was fast but not panicked, heading toward a line of low hills to the east. "What could it be?" Clara asked, her voice low so the children wouldn't hear the fear she couldn't quite mask. "Could be Indians," Ethan replied, his eyes never stopping their methodical scan of the horizon. "More likely riders, 5, maybe 6 by the size of the dust, moving with purpose." "Toward the homestead?" He nodded grimly. "Toward where the homestead was. Traveling that direction, they'll come across it by sundown." Clara's stomach clenched. "Who would be looking for us?" "Not you specifically," Ethan clarified, "but a woman alone with children, empty homestead. Some men see opportunity in that." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Clara had heard stories of women taken by force, children orphaned or worse. The frontier bred its own particular brand of predator, men who operated outside law or conscience. "Your husband have enemies?" Ethan asked after a while. "Thomas?" Clara almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "No, he was the gentlest soul. Everyone respected him." "Brothers?" She shook her head. "They kept to themselves. We all did." Ethan's silence spoke volumes. He didn't believe in coincidences, that much was clear. Neither did Clara, if she was honest with herself. The timing was too neat. Her family dead, her resources depleted, and now riders heading toward the abandoned homestead. They rode hard for an hour, putting distance between themselves and whatever threat might or might not exist behind them. The children bore it remarkably well. Even Sarah had stopped whimpering, seemingly understanding the need for quiet compliance. When they finally reached the shelter of the hills, Ethan led them to a small ravine where a trickle of water cut through the rock. It wasn't much, but it provided cover and the means to refresh themselves and the horses. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, helping Clara down, "but we move again before dusk." "You think they're following us?" Clara asked, settling James against her shoulder where he fussed quietly. Ethan's expression was unreadable. "I think it's best not to find out." While the children drank and stretched their legs under Clara's watchful eye, Ethan climbed to a high point in the rocks. She watched him study the back trail with a brass spyglass, his body utterly still except for the minute adjustments of the glass. When he returned, his face gave nothing away. They reached the homestead, 4 men. Clara felt cold despite the afternoon heat. "Could you see what they were doing?" 2 went inside. 2 checked the outbuildings. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Good thing we left when we did. The simple statement sent a shiver down Clara's spine. If they had delayed by even a few hours, they would have been at the homestead when those men arrived. The thought of what might have happened made her gather Emma and Sarah closer, as if physical proximity could somehow protect them from the dangers that seemed to lurk at every turn. "Why would they be looking for us?" she whispered. Ethan considered her for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. "Might not be you they're after," he finally said. "Might be me." The admission hung between them, changing everything and nothing at once. Clara studied his face, searching for clues to this new mystery. "Who are you, Mr. Wade?" she asked quietly. "Really?" "A man who's made mistakes," he replied, his voice low enough that the children couldn't hear. "A man trying to set things right." Before she could press further, Emma tugged at her skirt. "Mama, I'm hungry." The moment broke. The unanswered questions forced to wait, as the immediate needs of her children took precedence. Clara helped Ethan distribute a simple meal of jerky, dried apples, and hardtack, watching as he interacted with the girls with that same surprising gentleness she'd noticed earlier. "Mr. Wade," Emma said between bites, "do you fight bad men?" Ethan paused, his weathered face softening as he regarded the child. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when there's no other choice." "Are there bad men chasing us?" Her small voice was matter-of-fact, without fear. Clara opened her mouth to offer reassurance, but Ethan spoke first, his tone serious but calm. "There might be, but I won't let them hurt you or your mama or your sister and brother. That's a promise." Emma studied him with solemn eyes, then nodded, apparently satisfied. "Papa used to say promises are sacred." "Your papa was right." Ethan's gaze flicked briefly to Clara. "I don't make them lightly." They moved on as the sun began its descent, following game trails through the hills rather than crossing open country. Ethan set a grueling pace, clearly intent on putting as much distance between them and their pursuers as possible before nightfall. The children were exhausted by the time they made camp in a sheltered hollow, too tired even for questions or complaints. Clara laid them on blankets beneath a makeshift shelter Ethan constructed from canvas and branches, watching as they fell into immediate sleep. "You should rest too," Ethan said, appearing silently at her side. "I'll keep watch." "All night?" "I don't need much sleep." Clara studied him in the fading light, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes that belied his claim. "You're not invincible, Mr. Wade." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Never claimed to be, ma'am." "Clara," she said suddenly, "if we're going to be running for our lives together, you might as well use my given name." He nodded, accepting this small shift in their relationship. "Clara, then, and I'm Ethan." She settled near the children, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the growing chill. Ethan moved to the edge of their small camp, rifle across his knees, a sentinel between her family and whatever dangers lurked in the night. "Tell me about these men," she said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. "The ones who might be following you." He was silent so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I used to ride with a man named Jericho Davis. Did things I'm not proud of." The name sent a jolt through Clara. Jericho Davis was infamous throughout the territory, a rustler, robber, and worse. Newspapers had carried stories of his gang's exploits for years. "You were part of his gang?" She couldn't keep the shock from her voice. 5 years, Ethan confirmed, his face in shadow. "Until your father caught me trying to steal his horses." The revelation struck Clara speechless. This man, whom her father trusted enough to fetch his estranged daughter and grandchildren, had once been an outlaw. She couldn't reconcile the gentle way he treated her children with the violent reputation of Davis's gang. "What happened?" she finally managed. "He could have had me hanged, had every right to." Ethan's voice remained steady, matter of fact. "Instead, he offered me a choice. Work for him honestly for 5 years to repay my debt, or face the hangman's noose. And you chose to work for him." "Wasn't much of a choice," Ethan admitted. "But turns out, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Your father, he's a hard man but a fair one, taught me there are better ways to live than taking what isn't yours." Clara tried to reconcile this image of her father with the unyielding, judgmental man she had left behind 7 years ago. "The Samuel Montgomery I knew wouldn't have given a horse thief a second chance." "People change," Ethan said simply. "Loss has a way of reshaping a man's thinking." "Loss?" "Your leaving broke something in him," Ethan said, his eyes finding hers across the darkness. "He never admitted it outright, but those of us who worked close with him could see it." Clara looked away, uncomfortable with the surge of emotion his words provoked. For years, she had nursed her anger at her father's rejection of Thomas, his dismissal of her choices. She had never considered that her departure might have wounded him as deeply as his disapproval had wounded her. "Why did he send you to find me?" she asked. "Why now?" Ethan shifted, checking the loading of his rifle before answering. "He's been looking for you for years. When word came about the fever spreading in your area, he feared the worst. Sent me because I know this country better than most, and because he trusted me to bring you back safely. Even knowing those men might be after you?" His silence was answer enough. "If I'd known I was putting my children at risk," she began. "You weren't," Ethan interrupted firmly. "Davis has a grudge against me, not you, and he doesn't know I'm working for your father. If those are his men back there, they're following a rumor, nothing more." The reassurance felt hollow given their hasty flight, but Clara was too exhausted to argue. The day's tension and exertion were catching up to her, making her eyelids heavy despite her concerns. "Sleep," Ethan said gently. "I'll wake you if there's trouble." As she drifted toward unconsciousness, Clara found herself wondering about this complex man who had entered their lives so unexpectedly. An outlaw turned protector. A man her father trusted with his most precious remaining possessions, his daughter and grandchildren. A man who was risking his life to fulfill a debt of honor. Just before sleep claimed her completely, she saw Ethan silhouetted against the night sky, watchful and steady, a barrier between her family and harm. Despite everything she had learned, she felt safer than she had since Thomas's death. Clara woke to the gentle touch of Ethan's hand on her shoulder. The sky was still dark. Stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast expanse above them. Her body protested as she sat up, muscles stiff from the previous day's hard riding and the unyielding ground beneath her. "It's still night," she whispered, careful not to wake the children who slept soundly beside her. 3 hours till dawn," Ethan confirmed, his voice equally low. "Need to move before first light." Clara's instinct was to protest. The children needed rest, needed stability. But the urgency in Ethan's eyes silenced her objections. "You saw something?" He nodded once, grim. "Campfire, about 5 miles back. Could be innocent travelers, but you don't believe in coincidences," she finished. "Not in my experience." He offered her a tin cup of coffee, the heat seeping through her gloves. "Drink. You'll need it." The coffee was strong and bitter, but it chased away the fog of sleep. As Clara sipped, she watched Ethan move around their small camp, dismantling the shelter, erasing signs of their presence with methodical efficiency. Every movement spoke of long practice, of a life spent watching his back trail. "You didn't sleep," she observed, noting the shadows beneath his eyes. Wasn't necessary. His dismissal brooked no argument. We need to wake the little ones, gently if we can. Rousing Emma and Sarah proved easier than Clara had feared. The girls were resilient, accepting the strange circumstances of their journey with a child's adaptability. Baby James fussed at being disturbed, but settled quickly once secured against Ethan's chest in the makeshift sling. "I can take him," Clara offered, surprised at how natural the sight of her son against Ethan's broad chest had become in just a day. "He's no trouble," Ethan replied, his large hand cradling the baby's head with surprising tenderness. "And you need to manage the girls and the mare." They rode in silence through the last hours of darkness, the only sounds the soft clopping of hooves and the occasional snuffle from the baby. Emma and Sarah, seated before Clara on the gentle mare, drifted in and out of sleep, their small bodies warm against her. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled, the prairie giving way to more rugged terrain. Ethan led them through narrow draws and around steep buttes, following what seemed to Clara to be no trail at all. Yet he moved with absolute confidence, never hesitating at forks or junctions. As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, they descended into a shallow valley where a small stream gurgled between rocky banks. Pine trees clustered along the water, offering shelter and the first real cover they'd seen since leaving the homestead. "We'll stop here," Ethan decided, swinging down from Thunder with fluid grace despite the baby strapped to his chest. "Rest the horses, get some proper food in all of you." Clara helped the girls down, their small legs stiff from the hours in the saddle. "Are we safe here?" "Safer," he amended, scanning the ridgelines above them. "This valley doesn't show from a distance. Water's good and there's game." He built a small, nearly smokeless fire using dry pine needles and twigs, producing heat without the telltale smoke that might give away their position. From his saddlebags came bacon and a small sack of cornmeal, luxuries compared to the previous day's jerky and hardtack. "Real food," Clara breathed, suddenly aware of the gnawing hunger that had been her constant companion for weeks. Ethan's eyes softened as he watched her reaction. "Your father wouldn't want his daughter and grandchildren starving on the trail." Clara helped him prepare a simple but hearty breakfast, the smell of frying bacon making her mouth water. The girls ate with abandon, their faces smeared with cornmeal mush, sweetened with the last of Clara's precious sugar. While they ate, Ethan kept James bouncing the baby gently on his knee when he fussed. Clara found herself watching them, struck by how comfortable Ethan seemed with the infant. "You're good with him," she observed, "for a man who claims to have no children." Something like sorrow flickered across his face. "Had a little brother once, raised him after our mother died." "What happened to him?" Clara asked, sensing a story in the careful way Ethan spoke. "Consumption, 6 years ago." His voice was flat, but his hand continued its gentle rhythm on James's back. He was 17. Clara's heart ached for the loss she heard beneath his matter-of-fact tone. "I'm sorry." Ethan nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. After a moment, he passed James back to her, rising to check on the horses. Emma followed him, her small face serious. "Mr. Wade, are the bad men still chasing us?" Clara tensed, but Ethan knelt to the child's level, addressing her question with the same respect he would show an adult. "I don't know for certain, Miss Emma, but we're being careful just in case." "Papa taught me to be careful," she said solemnly. "He said the prairie doesn't forgive mistakes." "Your papa was a wise man." Ethan's voice carried genuine respect. "He teach you about tracking?" Emma shook her head. "Come here then." He took her small hand, leading her to the stream's edge where the soft mud held clear impressions. "See these? Deer came through at dawn. Small herd, maybe 5 or 6. Emma studied the tracks with intense concentration. "How can you tell?" "Size, shape, direction, and this," he pointed to distinct markings, "tells me the lead doe was limping, Injured left foreleg. Could you catch her? Emma asked, eyes wide. I could, Ethan admitted, but we don't kill what we don't need. That doe's got fawns depending on her. Clara watched the impromptu lesson from where she sat with Sarah and James, struck again by the contradiction of this man. An outlaw who spoke of ethics. A gunman who showed such gentleness with children. A loner who seemed to understand the bonds of family. When the lesson ended, Emma returned to Clara's side, full of excitement about her new knowledge. Mama, Mr. Wade says I have good eyes. He says that's important for tracking. I'm sure it is, sweetheart. Clara smoothed her daughter's tangled hair, making a mental note to brush it properly when they next stopped. Ethan approached, his expression troubled. We should move on soon. I don't like staying in one place too long. The children need rest, Clara countered, though she kept her voice low. And so do you. His jaw tightened stubbornly. I'm fine. You haven't slept in over a day, she persisted. You'll be no good to any of us if you collapse in the saddle. For a moment she thought he would argue, then surprisingly he nodded. 2 hours, then we ride regardless. It was a compromise, but Clara accepted it, grateful for even this small concession. Ethan chose a spot against a large pine where he could see both the approach to the valley and their small camp. Within minutes of sitting down, his chin had dropped to his chest, his breathing deep and even. Clara busied herself washing the breakfast things in the stream, keeping the girls nearby where they played quietly with pine cones and sticks, inventing elaborate games as children do. James nursed, and then fell asleep in the sling she'd fashioned from her shawl, his small face peaceful in a way she hadn't seen since Thomas's death. As the children played, Clara found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Ethan's sleeping form. In repose, the hard lines of his face softened, making him appear younger. The gun belt remained buckled at his waist, one hand resting near the holster even in sleep. A habit born of necessity, she imagined. What kind of life had he led before her father found him? What horrors had he seen, or perhaps committed riding with Jericho Davis's gang? She tried to reconcile the man who gently taught her daughter about deer tracks with the outlaw he claimed to have been, and found she couldn't bridge the gap. Yet there was no denying the competence with which he had handled their flight from the homestead, the precautions he took, the way he seemed to anticipate dangers before they materialized. These were not skills acquired in peaceful pursuits. Precisely 2 hours after he had closed his eyes, Ethan woke, transitioning from sleep to full alertness without the groggy intermediate stage most people experienced. He surveyed their surroundings, checking the positions of sun and shadow with the precision of a man whose life had often depended on such awareness. Any trouble? He asked, rising to his feet with fluid economy of movement. Clara shook her head. Peaceful. The girls are rested. Good. He checked his weapons, the revolver at his hip, the rifle in its scabbard, the knife in his boot that Clara had noticed but never mentioned. We've got about 4 hours of daylight left. I want to make the canyon by nightfall. What canyon? Place I know. Defensible. Good water. We can rest there properly before pushing on to the trading post tomorrow. Clara nodded, trusting his judgment despite the lingering questions about his past. Whatever Ethan Wade had been before, he was now their protector, their guide through a wilderness that seemed increasingly hostile. The canyon appeared like a mirage as the sun began its descent, a narrow slash in the earth that Clara wouldn't have noticed if Ethan hadn't led them directly to it. Steep walls rose on either side of a clear stream, the eroded limestone creating natural shelves and small caves along the face of the cliff. We'll make camp there, Ethan said, pointing to an overhang about 20 feet above the canyon floor. Defensible, can see anyone approaching from either direction. Clara eyed the steep path dubiously. The children. I'll carry them up, he assured her. One at a time. You'll take James. The horses can stay below. There's good grazing and water, and they can't be seen from outside the canyon. His assessment proved accurate. The ledge beneath the overhang was spacious enough for all of them, with the added protection of a small cave extending into the cliff face. The children were delighted with their adventure house, as Emma immediately dubbed it. "Look, Mama," she cried, exploring the cave with fearless curiosity. "We're like birds in a nest." Clara couldn't help smiling at her daughter's enthusiasm, though her own body ached with exhaustion. 2 days of hard riding had taken their toll, and the constant vigilance left her mentally drained as well. Ethan disappeared briefly, returning with an armful of dried wood he'd collected from the canyon floor. "We can risk a fire tonight," he said, arranging the wood in a small circle of stones near the cave entrance. "Smoke will disperse against the cliff face. Nobody will see it unless they're already in the canyon." The prospect of a proper fire, of warm food and light against the coming darkness, lifted Clara's spirits. She set about preparing a simple supper from their provisions while Ethan secured the perimeter, setting small triggers, arrangements of pebbles and twigs that would alert him if anyone approached during the night. As the sun disappeared and twilight settled over the canyon, the temperature dropped rapidly. Clara gathered the children close to the fire, wrapping their shared blanket around all 3 of them. James nursed contentedly, while the girls watched Ethan with undisguised fascination as he cleaned his revolver with practiced efficiency. "Have you killed many bad men, Mr. Wade?" Emma asked, her voice carrying that unique combination of innocence and morbid curiosity that only children can achieve. Clara tensed. "Emma, that's not a proper question." But Ethan didn't seem offended. He considered the child solemnly, his hands never pausing in their work. "I've killed men, yes, but I try not to think of it as many or few. Each life matters, even a bad man's." His answer surprised Clara. It wasn't the boastful reply of a gunslinger, nor the evasion she might have expected. "Did they deserve it?" Emma persisted. This time Ethan's hands stilled. He looked at the child, then at Clara, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Sometimes," he said finally. "Sometimes they gave me no choice. But other times," he shook his head slightly. "A man can convince himself of many things when he's young and angry." The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than any detailed confession might have been. Clara found herself wondering what had made him young and angry enough to ride with outlaws, and what had changed him into the man who now sat across the fire from her, teaching her daughters about conscience and responsibility. "I think that's enough questions for tonight," she said gently, noticing Sarah's eyes growing heavy. "Time for sleep, my loves." She settled the children in the cave, on a bed of soft pine boughs Ethan had gathered. They fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's journey, their small faces peaceful in the flickering firelight. When Clara returned to the fire, Ethan was staring into the flames, his expression distant. She settled across from him, wrapping her shawl tighter against the growing chill. "You're good with them," he said without looking up. "Your children, they trust you, feel safe with you despite everything." "They're resilient," Clara replied. "Children often are. More than adults sometimes." His voice held a note she couldn't quite identify, regret perhaps, or something deeper. "What happened to you, Ethan?" she asked quietly. "Before my father found you. Before Jericho Davis." He was silent so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her ears. "War happened, the kind that doesn't end when the fighting stops." Clara waited, sensing there was more. "I was 16 when I joined up Confederate Army, too young officially, but they weren't checking ages too carefully by then." His eyes remained fixed on the fire. "Saw things no boy should see. Did things no man should do." "You were a child," Clara said softly. "Wasn't a child by the time it ended." His jaw tightened. "Came home to nothing. Farm burned, parents dead from fever, just my brother Michael, 9 years old and skin and bones. The sparse details painted a vivid picture. A boy soldier returning from war to find devastation, left with a younger brother to raise and no resources to do it. The army taught me to shoot, to fight, to survive, didn't teach me how to live afterwards. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. Found I was good at taking. Horses, cattle, whatever we needed. Then met Davis. He made it seem organized, justified even. And then my father caught you. Ethan nodded. Caught me red-handed with his prize stallion. I expected a bullet. Got a second chance instead. He finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Your father saw something in me I didn't know was still there. Said he needed a man who could handle himself, who knew the territory. Offered me honest work, a decent wage. And you took it. Like I said, wasn't much of a choice. But turns out, living straight suits me better. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Your father's a hard man to work for, demanding, particular about how things are done, but fair, always fair. Clara tried to reconcile this image with the father she remembered, rigid, unyielding, dismissive of any path but the one he'd chosen. He wasn't fair to Thomas, she said, old hurt coloring her voice. Wouldn't even meet him, said a homesteader wasn't good enough for his daughter. He regretted that, Ethan said quietly. Told me so himself. Said pride cost him his only child. The simple statement stole Clara's breath. In 7 years, she had constructed an image of her father as unrepentant, hardened in his rejection of her choice. The possibility that he had experienced regret, that he had acknowledged his mistake, even to this near stranger, shook the foundations of her carefully maintained anger. He never wrote, she whispered. Never tried to contact us. He did, Ethan countered gently. 3 letters that first year, all returned unopened. After that, he started searching other ways. Hired trackers, sent men to every settlement in 4 territories. Clara stared at him, stunned. Thomas never told me about any letters. Can't blame a man for protecting his pride, Ethan said, no judgment in his tone. Being rejected by your father couldn't have been easy for him. The revelation settled over Clara like a physical weight. Had Thomas hidden the letters out of pride, out of fear that she might reconcile with her father and somehow diminish their life together? Or had he simply been trying to protect her from further pain? I don't know what to think anymore, she admitted, her voice small in the vast darkness surrounding their fire. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, Ethan replied, his tone gentler than she'd heard before. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. You need sleep too. He shook his head. I'm fine. Years of practice. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her, making her eyelids heavy. Wake me for second watch, she insisted. You're no good to us exhausted. A fleeting smile touched his lips. Yes, ma'am. As she settled beside her sleeping children, Clara found her mind returning to the image of Ethan as a 16-year-old soldier, then as a desperate young man trying to care for his brother the only way he knew how. The picture humanized him, helped explain the contradictions she'd observed, the violence and gentleness, the wariness and honor. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that perhaps she wasn't the only one who deserved a second chance. The crack of a gunshot shattered the pre-dawn silence, jerking Clara from deep sleep to full alertness in an instant. She lunged for her children, gathering them close as they woke, crying and confused. Ethan was already at the edge of the ledge, rifle raised, scanning the canyon below. Stay down, he ordered, his voice a harsh whisper. Keep them quiet. Clara pressed James to her chest, murmuring soothing words to Emma and Sarah as she strained to hear over their frightened whimpers. The echoes of the shot had faded, leaving an unnatural silence in their wake. "What is it?" she whispered when she could bear the suspense no longer. "Not sure." Ethan's body was utterly still, a predator sensing danger. Could be hunters, could be something else. Another shot rang out, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of male voices. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she pulled her daughters deeper into the cave's shadows. "4 men," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "Bottom of the canyon, looking for something." His jaw tightened. Or someone. "The men from the homestead?" Clara's mouth had gone dry with fear. He nodded once, grim. "Stay here. Don't move, no matter what you hear." Before she could protest, he was moving, sliding down from their ledge to the canyon floor with silent efficiency. Clara watched him disappear into the pre-dawn shadows, her throat tight with fear. The girls clung to her, sensing her tension despite her attempts to appear calm. "Where's Mr. Wade going?" Emma whispered, her small face pale in the dying firelight. "To make sure we're safe," Clara replied, forcing confidence into her voice. "He'll be back soon." The minutes stretched endlessly as Clara strained to hear what was happening below. Occasional shouts drifted up, too distant to make out words, but close enough to send fresh waves of fear through her. Then came another shot, followed by a cry of pain that made her blood run cold. Sarah began to cry in earnest then, her small body trembling against Clara's side. "I want Papa," she sobbed, the words muffled against Clara's skirt. "Shh, sweetheart, I know." Clara gathered her closer, her mind racing. If Ethan had been hurt, or worse, what would she do? The horses were below, but even if she could get the children down safely, where would they go? She had no weapon, no provisions, no idea where they were in relation to civilization. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm her, she heard the scrape of boots against stone. She pushed the children behind her, grabbing a heavy branch from their wood pile, a pathetic weapon, but better than nothing. "It's me." Ethan's voice came quietly from the path. "We're clear." Relief flooded through Clara, so intense it left her lightheaded. Ethan appeared at the ledge, a dark silhouette against the gradually lightening sky. As he came closer, she saw blood on his sleeve, a spreading stain that glistened black in the dim light. "You're hurt," she gasped, rushing to him. "Bullet grazed me. Nothing serious." He shrugged off her concern, though his face was drawn with pain. "We need to move. Now, before more come." "There will be more?" Clara asked, already gathering their meager belongings. "Those were Davis's men, all right. Scouts." His expression was grim. "They'll be missed when they don't report back." Clara hesitated, processing the implication. "Did you? 2 ran. 2 didn't." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Wouldn't have been any of them if they'd been reasonable. But they recognized me, knew I was riding with a woman and children." The cold practicality of it chilled Clara, reminding her of the man he had once been, the outlaw who had survived by violence, who had ridden with Jericho Davis's notorious gang. "The girls," she murmured, glancing at Emma and Sarah, who were watching with wide, frightened eyes. Ethan's expression softened as he knelt to their level. "Everything's all right now," he said gently. "But we need to leave this place. Can you be brave a little longer?" Both girls nodded solemnly, though Sarah's thumb crept into her mouth, a habit she'd abandoned months ago that had resurfaced with the stress of their journey. "Good girls," Ethan said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to reassure them. "We'll be at the trading post by noon. Hot food, proper beds." The promise of comfort seemed to rally their spirits. Even Clara felt a surge of hope at the prospect of civilization, however rudimentary. After 2 days in the wilderness, even a rough trading post sounded like paradise. They left as the first rays of sunlight touched the canyon rim, Ethan leading them along a different route than they had entered, a steeper, more difficult path that he claimed would be harder to follow. Clara didn't question his judgment. Whatever he had been before, he was now their protector, and he had proven his commitment to their safety with his blood. "Let me look at your arm," she insisted when they stopped briefly to water the horses at a small spring. Ethan started to refuse, then seemed to reconsider at her determined expression. "If it'll make you feel better." The wound was worse than he'd admitted, a deep furrow across his upper arm that had soaked his sleeve with blood. Clara cleaned it as best she could with water from the spring, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind it. "You need stitches," she said, noting how he winced despite his attempts to hide his pain. "It'll hold till the trading post. Old Mac keeps a medicine chest." He flexed his arm experimentally. "Besides, I've had worse." "That doesn't make it less serious now." Her hands were gentle despite the scolding tone. "You can't protect us if you bleed to death." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Takes more than a bullet graze to put me down." As she finished tying the makeshift bandage, her fingers lingered briefly on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath her touch. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did back there." His eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "Just doing what I promised your father. Is that all?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. For a moment, something raw and honest flickered across his face, vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Then his expression closed again, guarded. "We should move on. Still a lot of ground to cover." The rest of the morning passed in tense vigilance, Ethan constantly scanning their back trail for signs of pursuit. The landscape gradually changed, the rugged terrain giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine and scrub oak. Clara felt exposed on the more open ground, but Ethan assured her they were safer here than in the narrow confines of canyons and ravines. "Harder to be ambushed in open country," he explained. "Can see trouble coming." By midday, as promised, the trading post came into view, a collection of low buildings surrounded by a tall palisade. The sight of it, crude as it was, brought tears to Clara's eyes. After days of constant movement and danger, the simple wooden structures represented safety, rest, civilization. "Fort's a generous term," Ethan said, noting her reaction, "but it's solid enough. Mac keeps it well provisioned, and there's usually a room for travelers." As they approached the gates, Clara became acutely aware of their appearance. Her dress stained and torn, the children dirty and disheveled, Ethan's bloodied sleeve. They must look like refugees, she thought, or worse, fugitives. Her fears proved unfounded. The gray-bearded man who emerged to greet them, old Mac himself, she presumed, showed no surprise at their condition. "Wade," he said, nodding to Ethan. "Been a while." "Mac." Ethan dismounted stiffly, his injured arm clearly troubling him more than he'd admitted. "Need a room, food, medicine chest if you've got it." The older man's shrewd eyes took in Ethan's blood-stained sleeve, Clara's exhausted face, the three children. "Trouble following?" "Might be," Ethan acknowledged, "but not immediate." Mac nodded, apparently satisfied. "Got a cabin out back. Not fancy, but private. Got a woman who cooks decent meals." He glanced at Clara with surprising gentleness. "Mrs. looks like she could use a hot bath and a proper bed." Clara could have wept with gratitude at the simple kindness in his voice. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Bring your horses round back," Mac instructed, already turning to lead the way. "I'll have Sadie get that bath started." As they followed him through the sturdy gates, Clara felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. For the first time since leaving the homestead, they would sleep with solid walls around them, eat at a proper table, perhaps even change into clean clothes. She glanced at Ethan, who rode beside her with alert watchfulness despite their supposedly safe surroundings. Whatever came next, whatever dangers still pursued them, they had reached this milestone together. And somewhere in the midst of fear and flight, she had come to trust this complex, contradictory man with not just her life, but her children's futures. The cabin behind the trading post was humble but clean, a single room with a plank floor, rough-hewn furniture, and windows covered with oiled paper that let in a soft, diffused light. To Clara, after days on the trail, it seemed luxurious beyond measure. Sadie, Mac's wife, was a stout woman with capable hands and few words. She brought a large copper tub, filled it with steaming water, and laid out a simple dress that she said had belonged to a traveler who had died the previous winter. Fever took her, she explained in her terse way. No kin to send her things to. Might fit you well enough. Clara accepted the gift with heartfelt gratitude. Her own dress was beyond salvaging, stained with dirt, sweat, and Ethan's blood. The borrowed garment was plain but clean, a faded blue calico that would serve until they reached Fort Collins. While Clara bathed the children, scrubbing away days of trail dust and fear, Ethan submitted to Mac's ministrations. The older man cleaned and stitched his wound with the efficiency of someone who had treated many such injuries, offering whiskey as the only anesthetic. "Davis is still looking for you," Mac said as he worked, his voice carrying through the thin wall that separated the cabin from the small lean-to where they had set up for the medical treatment. "Word is, he took it personal when you left his gang." "It was personal," Ethan replied, his voice tight with pain. "Told him I was done. He didn't take it well. Man like that doesn't accept desertion, especially from someone who knows as much as you do." Clara tried not to eavesdrop as she dressed Emma and Sarah in the clean clothes Sadie had provided, simple shifts that hung on their thin frames but were blessedly fresh. Yet she couldn't help straining to hear Ethan's response. "Knows I won't talk," he said after a long pause, "but he's got a reputation to protect. Can't have men thinking they can walk away." "He's in the territory," Mac continued. "Word came yesterday. Him and a dozen men moving north, asking questions." The news sent a chill through Clara. A dozen men led by one of the most notorious outlaws in the territory, hunting for Ethan, and by extension for her and her children. The fragile sense of safety the trading post had provided crumbled like sand between her fingers. Later, when the children were settled on a pallet in the corner, already drifting to sleep despite the early hour, Ethan came to the cabin. His arm was properly bandaged now, his face drawn with fatigue but clearer than it had been on the trail. He'd clearly taken the opportunity to wash as well, his dark hair still damp, his clothes changed for clean ones that Mac must have provided. "You heard," he said without preamble, settling heavily on the room's single chair. Clara nodded, keeping her voice low so as not to disturb the children. "What does it mean for us?" "Means we leave at first light, push hard for Fort Collins." His jaw was set in a grim line. 3 days' ride if we're lucky. "And if we're not?" He met her eyes directly, unflinching. "Then I lead them away from you. Mac will see you the rest of the way to your father." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "We stay together." Ethan's expression softened, something like surprise flickering in his eyes. "Clara, be reasonable. Davis wants me, not you. If it comes to it, we face it together," she interrupted. "You promised to take us to Fort Collins. My children trust you now. She broke off, unsure how to express the complicated tangle of emotions that had developed over their days together. "You what?" he asked quietly. Clara looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I trust you too," she said finally, "and I won't have you sacrificing yourself for us." A heavy silence settled between them, filled with unspoken words and complicated feelings. Clara was acutely aware of his presence across the small room, the breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his hands as they rested on his knees, the way the lamplight caught the silver at his temples. "Your father charged me with bringing you home safe," Ethan said at last. "That's what matters." "Is that all that matters to you?" The question hung in the air, dangerous in its implications. Clara knew she was treading on precarious ground. Thomas had been dead barely a month. Her grief was still raw, still present in every moment of every day. Yet here she was, feeling something for this man that she could neither name nor deny. Before Ethan could answer, a knock at the door interrupted them. Mac entered, carrying a tray laden with food, a hearty stew, fresh bread, even a small pot of honey. "Sadie thought you could use a proper meal," he said, setting the tray on the small table. His shrewd eyes took in the tension between them, but he made no comment. "I'll keep watch tonight. Got 2 men I trust on the gates." "Appreciate it," Ethan said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "We'll be gone at first light." Mac nodded, then hesitated. "Another thing. Ryder came in just now. Says there's a party of men camped about 15 miles east, asking about a man traveling with a woman and 3 little ones." Clara's heart sank. "So soon?" "They're moving fast," Mac confirmed. "But they won't come here tonight. Too dark already, and they don't know for certain you're here." "But they suspect," Ethan said. "Territory's not that big. Not many places a family would head after leaving a homestead." Mac shrugged philosophically. "Eat, rest. I'll wake you if there's trouble." After he left, Clara and Ethan shared the meal in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. The food was simple but delicious after days of trail rations, and Clara found herself savoring each bite, aware that such comforts might be scarce in the days ahead. "You should sleep," Ethan said when they had finished. "Tomorrow will be hard riding." "What about you?" "I'll keep watch a while." Clara studied his face, noting the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. "You need rest too. Your arm will heal," he finished. "I've had worse." "You keep saying that," she observed, "as if it somehow makes this injury less significant." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Habit, I suppose." Clara rose and moved to the pallet where her children slept peacefully, their small faces relaxed in the security of solid walls and their mother's presence. She knelt beside them, smoothing Emma's tangled hair back from her forehead. "They've become attached to you," she said softly, not looking at Ethan. "Especially Emma. She talks about you constantly." "They're good children," he replied, and she could hear the warmth in his voice. "Smart, brave, like their father." The words caught in her throat, grief washing over her anew. Thomas would be proud of how they've handled all this. Ethan was silent for a long moment, then carefully, "He'd be proud of you too." The simple statement unleashed something in Clara, a dam of emotion she had held back since Thomas's death. Tears came suddenly, silently, streaming down her face as she continued to stroke her daughter's hair. "I couldn't save him," she whispered. "Couldn't save my brothers. I tried everything, every remedy I knew, but the fever just..." She shook her head, unable to continue. She felt rather than heard Ethan move, kneeling beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "You kept your children alive," he said gently. "Got them through hunger and grief and fear. That's not nothing, Clara." His use of her name, the warmth in his voice, broke through her remaining defenses. She turned to him, seeking comfort without conscious thought, and found herself in his arms. He held her carefully, mindful of his wounded arm, as she wept against his chest. For Thomas, for her brothers, for the home and dreams she had been forced to abandon. When the storm of grief finally passed, Clara became acutely aware of their position, her face pressed against his shirt, his arms around her, one large hand cradling the back of her head with surprising gentleness. She pulled away slowly, embarrassed by her display of emotion. "I'm sorry," she murmured, not meeting his eyes. "I don't usually—" "No need to apologize," he interrupted softly. "Grief needs an outlet." Clara looked up then, finding his face closer than she had realized, his expression open and unguarded in a way she had rarely seen. Something shifted between them in that moment, a barrier falling, a recognition of deeper feelings neither had been willing to acknowledge. Before either could speak, a small voice interrupted them. "Mama." Emma was awake, looking at them with sleepy confusion. "Why are you crying?" Clara hastily wiped her eyes, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." Ethan rose smoothly, stepping back to restore a proper distance between them. "Your mama needs rest too," he told Emma gently. "Big day tomorrow." As Clara settled beside her children, she was acutely aware of Ethan moving to his position by the door, rifle across his knees, guarding them, as he had since the moment he'd arrived at the homestead. The brief moment of connection had passed, but something had changed nonetheless, something that could not be undone or forgotten. They left the trading post as dawn broke over the eastern hills, a thin mist clinging to the ground as they rode through the gates. Mac had provided fresh provisions, including a small flour sack filled with toys and sweets for the children, a kindness that had brought tears to Clara's eyes. "Fort Collins lies northeast," Ethan explained as they set out, "but we're going due north first into rougher country." "Why not take the direct route?" Clara asked, adjusting James in the new sling Sadie had fashioned for her. "Because that's what they'll expect." His expression was grim in the early light. "Davis knows these territories better than most. He'll have men watching the main trails." The wisdom of his strategy became apparent by mid-morning when they crested a ridge and Ethan pointed to a distant dust cloud along the eastern horizon. "Riders," he said simply, "moving fast, looking for something." "Or someone," Clara added, her mouth gone dry. "We've got a good lead," he assured her, though his eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings. "And they don't know exactly where we are." They pushed hard that day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and allow the children to stretch their legs. Emma had taken to riding with Ethan on Thunder while Sarah remained with Clara. The girls had adapted to the rhythm of travel with surprising resilience, though Clara noticed Sarah growing increasingly withdrawn, sucking her thumb more frequently and speaking less. By late afternoon, storm clouds were gathering on the western horizon, massive thunderheads building into anvil shapes that promised violent weather. Ethan studied them with concern. "Need to find shelter before that hits," he said. "Storm like that on open ground is dangerous." "Is there anywhere close?" Clara asked, eyeing the darkening sky nervously. "Line shack about 2 hours ahead. Used to be part of a cattle operation." He adjusted Emma's position in front of him. "We'll make it if we push." They rode harder, the horses sensing the approaching storm and responding to their riders' urgency. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Clara found herself constantly checking over her shoulder, uncertain whether she was more afraid of the storm or their pursuers. The line shack appeared just as the first heavy drops began to fall, a small, weathered structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. It was barely more than a one-room shelter with a sagging roof and walls that leaned slightly, but to Clara it represented salvation from the elements. Ethan dismounted quickly, checking the interior before helping Clara and the children inside. The space was dusty but dry, with a small stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a narrow cot against one wall. "Not exactly the Grand Hotel," he said with a wry smile, "but it'll keep us dry." While Clara settled the children, Ethan tended to the horses, securing them in a lean-to attached to the side of the shack. By the time he returned, soaked to the skin, the storm had fully arrived. Rain lashing against the windows, thunder cracking directly overhead. "Got a fire started just in time," Clara said, gesturing to the small blaze she had kindled in the fireplace. She had spread blankets on the floor, creating a play area for the girls while James slept in a makeshift cradle, fashioned from a wooden crate lined with spare clothing. Ethan stood dripping by the door, removing his drenched coat and hat. "Storm's bad," he reported. "Won't be moving till morning." "Will it slow them down too?" Clara asked quietly, conscious of Emma listening nearby. "Should," he replied, running a hand through his wet hair. "No man with sense rides in weather like this." "But Davis isn't just any man," Clara guessed, reading the concern in his eyes. "No." Ethan's voice was grim. "He's not." They ate a simple meal from their provisions, the children unusually quiet, subdued by the storm's violence. Even Emma, normally full of questions, seemed content to sit near the fire, playing with a small wooden horse Mac had given her. When it was time for bed, Clara arranged the blankets on the floor for the children, insisting that Ethan take the narrow cot due to his injured arm. He refused at first, but Clara was adamant. "You're wounded, and you need proper rest," she said firmly. "The children and I will be fine on the floor." Reluctantly, he agreed, though Clara noticed he positioned the cot where he could still see the door and window, his revolver within easy reach. The storm continued to rage outside, rain hammering against the roof and wind finding every crack in the aging walls. Clara lay beside her sleeping children, listening to the thunder roll across the sky and the occasional creak of the cot as Ethan shifted position. "Are you awake?" she asked softly when a particularly loud thunderclap made the shack tremble. "Yes." His voice came through the darkness, low and reassuring. "Do you think they're close?" She didn't need to specify who they were. A long pause. "Maybe, but they won't move in this weather." Clara pulled the blanket higher, though the night wasn't particularly cold. "What will happen when we reach Fort Collins?" "You'll be safe," he replied simply. "Your father has enough men, enough influence to keep Davis away." "And you?" The question slipped out before she could consider its implications. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll move on, once I know you're settled." The statement sent an unexpected pang through Clara's chest. Of course he would leave. That had always been the plan. He was bringing her to her father, fulfilling his obligation. What came after had never been discussed because it had never been relevant. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The cot creaked as Ethan sat up, though in the darkness she could see only his silhouette. "What I want doesn't much factor into it," he said finally. "It should." Clara sat up as well, careful not to disturb the children. "You deserve a choice too." "Clara." Her name on his lips sounded like both a warning and a plea. "You know what I am, what I've done." "I know who you are now," she countered. "The man who's risked his life repeatedly for me and my children. The man who treats my daughters with gentleness and respect. The man who," she broke off, unsure how to continue without revealing too much of her own confused feelings. "The man who rode with Jericho Davis for 5 years," he finished flatly. "The man with blood on his hands that won't ever wash clean." "People change," Clara said, echoing his own words from days earlier. "You told me my father changed after I left. Why is it so hard to believe you've changed too?" The silence stretched between them, filled only by the storm's fury and the soft breathing of the sleeping children. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice so low Clara had to strain to hear. "Because I don't trust it. This man I'm trying to be. Some days he feels like a coat I'm wearing that doesn't quite fit." The raw honesty of his admission moved her deeply. How many men would admit such vulnerability, such doubt? It made him more human, more real than any false confidence could have. "Maybe that's how change feels," she suggested gently, uncomfortable at first. "Until one day you realize the new coat has molded to you, become part of you." Another crash of thunder, followed by a brilliant flash of lightning that briefly illuminated the interior of the shack. In that instant, Clara caught Ethan watching her, his expression unguarded, filled with longing and conflict and something that looked remarkably like hope. The moment passed, darkness reclaiming the space between them. But something had changed, some truth acknowledged that could not be unseen or forgotten. "Try to sleep," Ethan said finally. "Dawn comes early, and we've got hard riding ahead." Clara lay back down, but sleep remained elusive. Her mind kept returning to the look in his eyes during that flash of lightning, and to the future that awaited them in Fort Collins. A future where their paths might separate forever, unless one of them found the courage to suggest another possibility. Morning arrived with unexpected clarity, the storm having scrubbed the air clean and left behind a brilliant blue sky. Clara woke to find Ethan already outside, checking the horses and scanning their surroundings with his customary vigilance. "Storm's passed east," he reported when she joined him, James balanced on her hip. "Ground's muddy, but passable. We should move soon." Clara nodded, noting the tension in his shoulders, the alertness in his eyes that suggested danger hadn't passed with the storm. "You're worried." "Davis won't have stopped looking," he confirmed, "and the rain will have washed away any false trails I laid." They ate quickly, packed efficiently, and were mounted within the hour. The children were subdued this morning, perhaps sensing the adults' tension. Even Emma, usually bubbling with questions, rode quietly in front of Ethan, her small hands clutching Thunder's mane. The landscape had transformed overnight, muddy streams cutting across what had been dry arroyos, wildflowers already lifting their heads in response to the sudden moisture. Under different circumstances, Clara might have found it beautiful. Today, she saw only potential danger, every ridge a possible hiding place, every thicket concealment for men who meant them harm. "How much farther to Fort Collins?" she asked as they paused at midday to rest the horses. "2 days if we push hard," Ethan replied, scanning the horizon with his spyglass. "Maybe less if the ground dries quickly." Clara watched him, noting the slight stiffness in his movements that suggested his wounded arm was troubling him more than he admitted. "Your arm is fine," he finished, though the tightness around his eyes belied the claim. "We need to keep moving." They rode hard through the afternoon, stopping only when necessary for the children's needs. The terrain grew more varied as they traveled northeast, rolling hills giving way to scattered pine forests and occasional rocky outcroppings. Each new feature provided potential shelter but also potential ambush points, a fact that kept Ethan constantly vigilant. As sunset approached, he led them to a small clearing beside a stream, sheltered on 3 sides by dense pines. "We'll camp here," he decided. "Good visibility, water, protection at our backs." While Clara prepared a simple meal, Ethan fashioned crude alarms around their perimeter, arrangements of twigs and pebbles that would alert them to anyone approaching in the night. She watched him work, struck again by the contradictions he embodied, the gentle way he showed Emma how to arrange the triggers, the lethal efficiency with which he checked and loaded his weapons. "Mr. Wade," Emma asked as they ate their dinner beside a small smokeless fire, "what's it like at Grandfather's house?" Ethan considered the question with the seriousness he always accorded the child. "It's a fine house," he said finally. "Biggest in Fort Collins. Has a garden your mama might like and stables with horses." "Will we live there forever?" Emma persisted, her small face solemn in the firelight. Clara tensed, uncertain how to answer. Forever was a concept she no longer trusted, not after watching Thomas and her brothers die despite all her prayers and efforts. "Your grandfather wants you to stay," Ethan replied carefully. "He's been waiting a long time to meet you. Will you stay too?" The simple question hung in the air between them. Clara found herself holding her breath, awaiting his answer with an intensity that surprised her. Ethan's eyes met hers briefly over the child's head, something complicated and unreadable in their depths. "That's not for me to say, Miss Emma. But if Mama asked you to stay, would you?" Emma pressed, with a child's unerring instinct for the heart of a matter. "Emma," Clara interrupted gently, "that's enough questions for tonight. Help Sarah get ready for bed." As the children settled into their blankets, Clara felt Ethan's gaze on her but couldn't bring herself to meet it. Emma's innocent question had exposed feelings Clara was not yet ready to confront, not with Thomas's death still so fresh, not with danger still dogging their trail, not with her future so uncertain. "I'll take first watch," Ethan said quietly when the children were asleep. "You should rest while you can." Clara nodded, grateful for the respite from conversation. But as she lay beside her children, sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to Emma's question and to the conflicted look in Ethan's eyes as he'd avoided answering it directly. What did she want? The question haunted her as she stared up at the star-filled sky. Thomas had been her choice, her love, her partner in building a life and family. His loss had left a void she hadn't imagined could ever be filled. Yet here she was, barely a month into widowhood, experiencing feelings for another man that she could neither deny nor fully accept. And Ethan himself, what did he want? He spoke of moving on after delivering them safely to her father, but was that truly his desire or merely what he believed was expected? The man who had held her while she wept, who had risked his life repeatedly for her children, who looked at her sometimes with such carefully controlled longing, did he want to disappear from their lives as suddenly as he had entered them? These questions still circled in her mind when Ethan gently woke her for second watch. The night was quiet, the fire burned down to embers. As she took her position, rifle across her knees, Ethan settled nearby, close enough to reach quickly if needed. "Sleep," she urged him. "I'll wake you at first light." He nodded, but didn't immediately close his eyes. Instead, he watched her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. About what Emma asked, "She's a child," Clara interrupted hastily. "Children ask impossible questions." "Not impossible," he countered softly. "Just difficult." The simple statement hung between them, fraught with implications neither seemed ready to address directly. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What would you have answered if I hadn't interrupted?" Ethan was silent so long she thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she'd rarely heard from him. "I would have said that if you wanted me to stay, wild horses couldn't drag me away." The admission, so plainly stated, stole her breath. "But I also would have said that a woman like you deserves better than a man like me." "Shouldn't that be my decision?" Clara asked, her voice catching. "Maybe," he conceded, "but your children deserve better too. A man without blood on his hands, without enemies who would burn the world to find him." "My children adore you," she countered softly. "Emma follows you like a shadow. Even Sarah, who speaks to almost no one, asks for Mr. Wade when she wakes." Something like pain crossed his features. "That's why I need to be certain, Clara, for their sakes as much as yours. Davis won't stop hunting me, not ever. Anyone connected to me will always be at risk." The truth of it settled between them, inescapable and harsh. This wasn't merely about feelings or choices or second chances. It was about survival, about the brutal reality of the frontier and the consequences of past actions that could never be fully escaped. "You should sleep," Clara said finally, unable to offer reassurances she wasn't certain she could keep. Ethan nodded, closing his eyes, though she doubted he would truly rest. As the night deepened around them, Clara kept her vigil, rifle ready, watching over her sleeping children and the complicated, honorable man who had come to mean so much to them all. Dawn was still hours away when Ethan suddenly sat up, fully alert without transition. "Something's wrong," he whispered, reaching for his revolver. Clara listened intently but heard nothing beyond the normal night sounds: crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of pine needles in the light breeze. "What is it?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Too quiet on the west perimeter," he replied, already moving to check his alarms. "Something's disturbed the wildlife." He was halfway across their small camp when a shot rang out, the bullet splintering the tree trunk inches from his head. In an instant, he was beside Clara, pushing her down behind the meager cover of a fallen log. "Davis!" he hissed, his body positioned protectively over hers. "Must have been tracking us since the storm broke." More shots followed, forcing them lower as bullets thudded into the earth around them. The children woke crying, terrified by the sudden violence. "Stay down," Ethan ordered, returning fire with precise, measured shots. "When I give the word, get to the horses. Ride northeast and don't stop for anything." "I won't leave you," Clara protested, clutching James to her chest while trying to calm Emma and Sarah. "You will," he countered grimly, "because your children need you alive." Before she could argue further, a voice called from the darkness, cold and mocking. "Wade came a long way to find you, boy. Time to settle accounts." "That's Jericho Davis," Ethan said, his voice low and tense. "I need you to listen carefully. The horses are saddled. When I move toward him, you take the children and ride. Fort Collins is northeast. Follow the North Star. Don't stop for anything." "You're asking me to leave you to die," Clara whispered fiercely. "I'm asking you to save your children." His eyes found hers in the darkness, intense and unflinching. "Please, Clara." Another volley of shots peppered the ground around them. Emma and Sarah clung to Clara, their small bodies trembling with terror. James began to wail, his cries cutting through the night. "Brought the whole family, Wade," Davis called mockingly. "Ain't that sweet? Always knew you were soft under all that meanness." Ethan's jaw tightened. "8 men, spread in a half circle," he murmured, having counted the muzzle flashes. "They want me, not you." "I won't leave you," Clara repeated, but the conviction in her voice was wavering. She looked at her terrified daughters, her helpless infant son, and felt the weight of her responsibility crushing against her heart. "You have to," Ethan said gently. "Your children need their mother, and your father needs his daughter." He touched her cheek briefly, the gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "I'll hold them here as long as I can. Give you time." "Wade," Davis called again, "send out the woman and kids. This is between you and me." "See," Ethan said, "he'll let you go." "And you believe him?" Clara challenged. "No," Ethan admitted, "but I believe in your courage and your love for your children." He pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch. "Your father's wedding present to your mother. He wanted you to have it when I found you." The simple action broke something in Clara. Ethan had never expected to survive this journey, had known from the beginning that Jericho Davis would come for him. And still he had ridden to save her and her children, to fulfill his promise to her father. "Come out, Wade." Davis was growing impatient. "Or we start burning this pretty little camp of yours." Ethan checked his revolver one last time. "When I move, you go, straight northeast, don't look back." Before Clara could respond, a new voice cut through the darkness. "Davis!" The shout came from behind their attackers, followed immediately by a volley of rifle fire. Confusion erupted among Davis's men, shouts of alarm mixing with cries of pain. What the... Ethan was already moving, pushing Clara and the children lower behind their makeshift shelter. "Montgomery's men!" one of Davis's gang shouted. "It's a trap!" More gunfire erupted, this time from both sides of their camp. Clara held her children close, shielding them with her body as bullets whizzed overhead. Ethan fired methodically from their position, each shot finding its mark as Davis's men broke cover in panic. "Ethan Wade," the new voice called again. "Samuel Montgomery, we've got you surrounded, Davis." Clara's heart leapt at the name. Her father. Somehow, impossibly, her father had found them. The firefight was brief, but intense. When it ended, silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the continued whimpering of the children. "Wade?" The voice was closer now, cautious. "You still alive in there?" "We're here," Ethan called back, not lowering his weapon. "Mrs. Henderson and her children are with me." A figure emerged from the trees, hands raised to show he meant no harm. In the faint pre-dawn light, Clara could make out a tall man with a silver-streaked beard, his bearing erect despite his years. "Clara?" he called, his voice catching slightly. "Clara, it's your father." 7 years of separation, of hurt and pride and misunderstanding dissolved in an instant. Clara rose on shaky legs. James clutched to her chest, the girls clinging to her skirts. "Papa," she whispered, and then louder, "Papa." Samuel Montgomery crossed the clearing in long strides, stopping a few feet from his daughter, his eyes drinking in the sight of her and the children as if they might vanish if he blinked. "My girl," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My Clara." Then his arms were around her, careful of the baby between them but fierce in their embrace. Clara felt tears streaming down her face as she leaned into the strength she had forgotten, the love she had denied herself for so long. "How did you find us?" she asked when they finally parted. "Got word from Mac at the trading post," her father explained. "Said Wade was bringing you home, but Davis was on your trail. I gathered every man I could trust and rode to meet you." His eyes found Ethan, who stood a respectful distance away. "Seems we arrived just in time." "Davis?" Ethan asked, his expression guarded. "Dead," Montgomery confirmed grimly. "Along with 4 of his men, the rest scattered or surrendered." A weight seemed to lift from Ethan's shoulders, though his posture remained alert. "You're certain?" "Saw him fall myself," Montgomery assured him. "It's over, son." Dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon as Montgomery's men secured the prisoners and tended the wounded. Clara sat with her father, introducing him to Emma, Sarah, and baby James, watching as the gruff old man melted under the curious gaze of his grandchildren. "They're beautiful, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thomas would be proud." The simple acknowledgement of her husband, spoken with genuine respect, healed something in Clara that she hadn't realized was still broken. "Thank you, Papa." Ethan kept his distance during this reunion, busying himself with the horses and their meager possessions. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the careful way he avoided intruding on their family moment. When her father was occupied with the children, she approached Ethan where he stood checking Thunder's saddle. "You knew," she said quietly. "You knew my father would come." Ethan shook his head. "Hoped, maybe. Never knew for certain. But you sent word with Mac. Asked him to send a rider if we didn't reach Fort Collins in 5 days," he admitted. "Just in case." "In case Davis found us," Clara finished. "You were prepared to sacrifice yourself to save us." He looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Wouldn't have been much of a sacrifice, just balancing accounts." "Is that what we are to you?" she asked softly. "An account to be balanced?" His eyes met hers then, raw with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "You know better than that." "Do I?" Clara stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool morning air. "Then tell me, Ethan Wade, what are we to you?" For a long moment he was silent, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her. "Everything," he said simply. "Everything I never thought I'd have. Everything I don't deserve. But everything I want all the same." Clara felt her heart swell with emotions too complex to name. Grief for Thomas still present but no longer all-consuming. Hope for a future she hadn't dared imagine. Love for this complicated man who had saved her in more ways than one. "We should go," her father called, approaching with Emma on his shoulders. "Fort Collins is still a day's ride, and you all need proper rest and care." As they prepared to leave, Clara found herself riding beside Ethan, their horses moving in companionable rhythm. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing their conversation from the line shack. Ethan glanced at her, then at the children riding ahead with Montgomery. "That depends." "On what?" "On what you want," he said simply. "Your father's offering me a position, foreman on his ranch." Hope bloomed in Clara's chest. "And will you take it?" His eyes held hers, steady and certain. "If you want me to." The sun broke fully over the horizon then, bathing them in golden light. Ahead, Clara's father rode with her daughters, already building the bonds that would connect them. Behind lay the homestead, Thomas's grave, the life that had ended so abruptly. Before them stretched Fort Collins, her father's home, and possibilities she was finally ready to embrace. "I want you to stay," she said softly. "Not as my father's foreman, not as our protector." She took a deep breath, finding courage she hadn't known she possessed. "As part of our family." Something like wonder crossed Ethan's weathered face. "You're sure?" "It's too soon." "It's soon," she agreed. "But we've faced death together, saved each other. That creates a bond time can't measure." She looked ahead at her children, her voice softening. "They need a father. I need—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't dishonor Thomas's memory, but would honor the truth in her heart. "I need someone to build a future with, and I choose you, Ethan Wade." He didn't answer immediately, and for a moment Clara feared she had misread everything. Then slowly, he reached across the space between their horses and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "Then I'm staying," he said simply, "for as long as you'll have me." The prairie stretched endlessly before them, gold and green under the morning sun. As they rode toward Fort Collins, toward her father's home and the new life awaiting them, Clara felt peace settle over her for the first time since Thomas's death. The journey had been hard, fraught with danger and loss, but it had led her here, to family reconciled, to children secure, to a man who would love and protect them all with everything he had. Not an ending, she thought, but a beginning. The dawn of something unexpected and precious, and entirely their own.